Good Wednesday to everybody out there. So good to see you again today. So good to be with you again today. As always, it's a joy and a privilege of mine to be able to be recording these on Wednesday morning and uploading them and getting them ready for you this evening as we prepare to meet here in person at 7 o'clock and to continue to discuss some of the events or some of the passages that relate to the events of the end of time. We are moving kind of slow, and I anticipated that a little bit, though I did not want to get bogged down or burdened down in any one particular spot. So trying to keep a flow as best we can, and of course, trying to keep you on the same track with those that are meeting at 7, and sometimes I can go faster in these settings than I can in that setting, and vice versa. And so it's been a little challenging, but trying to keep us both together and in the same place, not only for study purposes, but also just so that we can stay at the same place as we move through in this recorded fashion, and also in the live fashion that occurs at 7 o'clock tonight. As far as I know, everybody within the Leoma congregation is doing well. We have had some operations, procedure type things going on recently, but as far as I know, everybody is doing well after that. I do know that there are some back in Mississippi who have tuned in from time to time to watch our Bible classes together, and obviously home folks for me. And I do know that home is getting hit very hard right now with the virus and with other things. And so if you're in the North Mississippi area, our prayers are certainly with you. I won't mention any names or families or even congregations for that matter. But some folks that are near and dear to our family have been affected by this virus recently. And so our prayers, our thoughts, our concerns are with them. And certainly some great congregations of the Lord's people down there have been affected, and great people within them are grieving today. And so we're moved by that as well, and just want you to know that though distance separates us geographically, obviously our love and care for one another is as close as we'll ever be. And so if you're in that part of the world, we just want you to know we're thinking about you. And for those of you that are not in that part of the world, I ask you to pray for those in North Mississippi, and they've lost some great Christian people, and the church is hurting in several places down there because of the spread of this virus, and who knows, it may be our turn at some point. And so we just keep each other in prayer and our concerns for one another. I hope you'll go with me to Revelation 16 as we start this evening. I've been promising a discussion about things like the Battle of Armageddon, the rapture, the tribulation, the millennial reign. And those things are coming, and this evening we'll get into a few of those and discuss them just a little bit. I plan to share a chart or two with the congregation here tonight at 7. And I hate that I'm not smart enough to know how to get these charts to you or to be able to share them in this format. Maybe I'll post them on the Facebook page or something, but you may be watching this on YouTube. But anyway, there are some charts out there. If you'll just go Google the end of time chart or timeline. Again, please hear me carefully. There's a lot of things out there that are not accurate, but it will help you to try to understand what is being taught and where these people are coming from and what they're using to explain or solidify their doctrinal beliefs about the end of time. One of those that I want to show tonight is called a tribulation map. And basically it shows the rapture and where that occurs. And then it shows this 7-year period of tribulation. And it discusses some things going on in the book of Revelation, from the seals to the trumpets to the bowls. But what I really like about this chart, though a lot of it I don't believe is biblical, what I love about this chart is that it pinpoints precisely where the thought process is for the Battle of Armageddon. And that's what we're going to get into in Revelation 16. So let me do this. Let me just read it. Would you read along with me, Revelation 16, beginning in verse 12? I'm in the English Standard Version. The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. So if you follow the book of Revelation, you've had 7 seals, 7 trumpets, and now we're in the 6th of the 7th bowls. And it is the water that is going to dry up and prepare the way for the kings from the east. And so as you Google the charts or the timeline of the Battle of Armageddon, what you'll find is these arrows drawing in all of these nations from the east and the Euphrates River being dried up. So this boundary is going to be removed and allow access. What was once a protection, once a boundary that was difficult to cross because it's a big river, is now going to be dried up thanks to the bowl of this angel being poured out on it. And so you're going to be able to cross on dry ground. From the east, those kings. And I saw coming from the mouth of the dragon and the mouth of the beast and out of the mouth of the false prophet. So, do we have 3 in 1? Do we have 1 in 3? Do we have 3 different ones? The point is, they're all a reference to the same, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. They're all a reference to the same army, if you will. They're all a reference to the same allegiance, whether they be 1 in 3 or 3 in 1 or all 3 different from each other. Out of them came 3 unclean spirits like that of frogs. Well, I guess I need to keep reiterating this, but remember, we're in the book of Revelation, and we're in apocryphal language, apocryphal literature. We're in symbolic metaphors all over the place. And so obviously frogs have a meaning to these people. Obviously the dragon, the beast, the false prophets have reference to these people and what is going on here. And he says in verse 14, for they are demonic spirits. Now, if we didn't know anything else, that's good enough right there. They are evil, demonic spirits performing signs who go abroad to the kings of the whole world to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. So here we have this reference to this battle of where these kings are going to assemble, and the assembling of all of these great kings of the earth against the God of heaven, the Almighty God. There's only 3 times where this battle is mentioned. One is here. One is in Revelation 19 and verse 19. There's a battle mentioned there. And then in Revelation 20 and verse 8, the very first passage that we looked at 2 weeks ago, there was a battle there that was going on. Only 3 times. So those who hold to the Battle of Armageddon and to its factual existence would use these 3 passages to show there is a battle that is being started here. And it's at the end of time, and it's right before the second coming of Christ. If you were able to see this tribulation map, it actually leads up to the second coming of Christ. As a part of the final ending of the 7 years of tribulation, as they would hold that. And so, Jesus says, behold, I am coming like a thief, verse 15. Wait a minute. We're going to have all these events and all this knowledge and all this time, and we're going to have these years of preparation, and we're going to have these events that occur, supposedly. And so, what do you mean you're going to come like a thief? We're going to be prepared for all of this. We're going to be able to count down all of this according to those who claim all of this to be the case. And when we see the battle beginning, wow, surely we'll have some time then. But Jesus says, I'm going to come like a thief. Well, folks, if you call me right now and tell me you're going to break in my house tonight, trust me, this ain't going to be good for you or me. You see, the thief doesn't broadcast that he's coming, because if he did, we'd all be prepared for it, wouldn't we? I mean, furthermore, I'd send my family to somebody else's house for the night, and I would be sitting there ready to defend my own life and my own property. That's what we do. But when you're going to come like a thief, you see, if I've got all these events that are leading up to it, then there's no thief element of surprise at all to the second coming or to the end of time. Jesus says in verse 15, blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on so that he might not be naked or seen exposed. There's the whole message to all 32 whatever lessons we have on the end of time. If you don't get anything else, Revelation 16 and verse 15 is the message. Jesus says, stay awake. Jesus says, be alert. Jesus says, be dressed, be ready, so that your nakedness is not exposed. In other words, this is coming. Be ready for it. I'm warning you. And then in verse 16, and they assembled them at the place that is in Hebrew called Armageddon. There's your battle of Armageddon. The only time it's mentioned in all of Scripture, one time, it is a hapax legomenon, a legomen. So we don't have any other thing to compare it to. Now, the difficulty is there's a breathing mark in Greek. And depending on how that breathing mark is above the A, if it's turned one way, it's actually pronounced with the H sound. So it becomes Har-Mageddon. Okay? But if it's the other way, then it's the alpha, it's the A, it's Armageddon. Okay? So we come into it with the Battle of Armageddon because we've got a battle being discussed here. It's taking place at a Hebrew location called Armageddon, or perhaps Har-Mageddon, or Har-Megiddo. You see, Har, H-A-R, in Greek means mount or hill of. So it could be that what we have is the Mount of Megiddo. So, more accurately translated, Har-Mageddon, more accurately translated, Mount or Hill of Megiddo. Does that place exist? Yes. Do we know anything about that place? Yes. As a matter of fact, there's a valley, just with every mountain, there's a valley, right? So there's a valley of Megiddo right there at the foot of the hill or the Mount of Megiddo. And in that valley is where Judges 5, Deborah and Barak defeated the Canaanites. In that valley is where Gideon in Judges 7 defeated the Midianites as he fought there. In that valley, according to 2 Kings chapter 9, is where Jehu's arrow went through the king Ahazariah. It's also the place, according to 2 Kings 23, where the godly righteous king Josiah was killed. And when that happened, what occurred then, according to Zechariah chapter 12, was the nation of Israel grieved because of Josiah's death. And basically, that became a memorial spot of battle, of war, of death, of blood, and all of that. And so, with that being said, to a group of people in the first century, John is having this revelation about this battle that's occurring, and guess where it happens? It happens in the place of Megiddo. A place that would be much like for you and I, a reference to maybe the Alamo or Pearl Harbor, or maybe for some of us in Middle Tennessee here and in North Mississippi and Alabama, a place like Shiloh, where we have a battleground, where we have a cemetery, where we have a significant event in the history of us as Americans, that when you say Pearl Harbor, immediately my mind, December the 7th, 1941, the beginning of World War II, if you will, the attack on Pearl Harbor. Or if you say Shiloh, I think about the Civil War. I think about brother fighting against brother. I think about the Confederate and the Union troops. All of those things flood to my mind. In the same way, for a first century Christian, when you say the Armageddon or when you say Har-Megiddo, they would think about all of these things that took place and the significance of them. And if you go to Revelation 20 and verse 8, there's really not a battle there, is there? I mean, they all gather up, God just strikes them dead. So all of this pomp and circumstance to something that really doesn't take place. And I would further suggest to you that the Battle of Armageddon has really been the misuse of the Hebrew Greek Harmageddo, basically just referencing to a place, not a battle at the end of time. Oh, there's a battle going on, right? The battle is in your heart. The battle is for your soul. Read Ephesians 6 and verse 12. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. No, we got a different battle going on. It is a battle against the principalities and powers of the darkness of this age. It's a battle of good and evil. It's a battle of righteousness and unrighteousness. It's a battle between God and Satan. It is a spiritual battle. It's going on in your heart and for your soul every day of your life. In Joshua 24 and verse 15, Joshua says, you can serve those gods, but as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. That's the battle. And that battle is going to go on until the end of time. And then when time is no more, the battle will be settled. God will pour out His wrath on those who are disobedient, on those who reject His truth, and He will accept with great reward those who are faithful. I'm not denying the fact that there's a battle. I'm just denying the fact that there's not a battle of Armageddon that's going to happen right before the return of Christ. Because I don't believe that the Scripture teaches that significant event. It rather uses a significant place to describe a spiritual battle upon which is happening on the earth, in the lives and through the lives of human people. And so with that said, let's move to Matthew 24, can we? In Matthew 24, there is a long chapter here, even into Matthew 25. And there is a lot in here about different events, including the second coming of Christ or the end of time. So in Matthew 24, can you get to verse 1? Jesus left the temple. He was going away. His disciples came out to the building of the temple. But He answered, you see all these, do you not? Truly, I say to you, there will not be here one stone left upon another that will not be thrown down. So they're in the temple complex. And Jesus says, let me tell you about something that's about to happen. Around 30 AD or so, early 30s. Let me tell you about something that's going to happen. About 70 AD, destruction of Jerusalem. Not a stone's going to be left on top of another stone. So He sits down, verse 3, at the Mount of Olives, and His disciples come to Him privately. And this is one of the discourses at the Mount of Olives, or the Olivet Discourse, as we would call it. Telling us, listen to what they ask. Telling us, number one, when will these things be? And number two, what will be the sign of the coming of your coming and the end of the age? So asking two questions. Now here's what you got to realize in Matthew 24. There are two answers that are running interchangeably, intertwined, interwoven in amongst the two. And it is very difficult to say with certainty which is which. Now you say, these things obviously deal with the destruction of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, AD 70. And the other events obviously refer to His coming, the end of time, the second coming. That's what we're concerned about. But the problem is that far too many people take what's going to happen in Jerusalem and apply it to the second coming. Far too many people take this whole chapter and say, these are all events that deal with the coming of Christ, the second coming, the end of time. And that's just not accurate at all. There's clearly two questions being asked here and two questions being answered by Jesus. Jack Cottrell, in his book, The Faith Once for All, says that it's like looking through a telescope at two mountaintops. And it appears that those mountaintops are very similar. It appears that a lot is the same for those two mountaintops. And even through the telescope, it appears that those two mountaintops are very close together when in reality they are separated by a great distance. And he says that that's the best way to view Matthew 24 into Matthew 25. Looking through the telescope, seeing the two mountaintops, one being the destruction of Jerusalem, the other being the coming of Christ, the second coming, the end of time, and these two events being separated across time by a great distance, yet you're looking at both of them with their similarities, with their occurrences and occasions and things that are going to be synonymous with the two. And so, Jesus begins in verse 4, see that no one leads you astray, because ultimately, the biggest challenge, the problem of the day and the time was to flee Jerusalem. Not the end of time, not the second coming. These people are just a few years removed, just a few years out on the destruction of Jerusalem, and that's the problem. And here's what's going to happen. False teachers are going to come in, false prophets. And Jesus is warning them. Jesus is trying to help them. And just to give you one snapshot into, look at verse 33. So also you will see all these things, and you will know that he is near at the very gate. These things at the very gate of the city. Truly I say to you, this generation, verse 34, will not pass away until all these things take place. It appears in verse 33 and 34 that Jesus is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, not the second coming, not the end of time. But then verse 36, but now concerning the day or the hour, no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son of Man, but the Father only. Now concerning that day, well, it appears in verse 36 that he has switched to the second question, and he begins in verse 36 to talk about things, yet he goes back to talk about things that will happen with the second coming, with the destruction of Jerusalem, rather. And so interchangeably, back and forth, it's unknown. And clearly, before our time runs out, I will tell you that Matthew 24, like verse 40, then two men will be in the field, one will be taken, one will be left. Two women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know what hour the Lord, your Lord, is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known, therefore, verse 44, you must always be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour that you do not expect. And so from there comes the idea of the rapture, from there comes the idea of the tribulation, from there comes the idea of the millennium, all of which we need to develop, to establish further. And what they would say, very briefly here, is that Jesus is describing the end of time. Well, there are a few verses that clearly point out to the end of time, the second coming of Christ. And then there are a few verses that challenge us, because he uses words like, in verse 29, he uses the word immediately. Immediately. Okay? Immediately after the tribulation of those days. Okay? Well, what is immediate? What does it mean? When is it happening? What is the time reference of all of this? And so, I could talk to you about fleeing Jerusalem from destruction, like in verse 14. And it doesn't use the term immediate, but yet things are coming. Like in verse 19, it's going to be hard for certain groups, namely those who are pregnant or nursing young children. Verse 20, it's going to be hard at certain times, namely the winter or the Sabbath. Matthew writing to a Jewish audience, remember, and so the Sabbath would be important. But the tribulation is going to come. The tribulation is going to come in reference to the destruction of Jerusalem, not in reference to the end of time. And so as we continue in this study, we'll talk about things that are being taught and said in the world about the tribulation and about the 3.5 years and 3.5 years and all of Daniel's timing in Daniel 9 and all of this that works in. The point is that the tribulation has to do with Jerusalem. And it is a tribulation unlike anything else they've ever seen to deal with the destruction. And then verse 34, they're going to see this. This generation is not going to pass. And so some have suggested that he's actually talking about mankind and humanity. And so humanity is going to be around till the second coming. That's absolutely right. But in its specific reference to the generation, that generation is going to have to endure the tribulation of the destruction of Jerusalem. Look at verse 21 and ask me this. For then there will be great tribulation, such has not been from the beginning of the world until now, and now never will be. And verse 22, and if those days had not been cut short. Now, what do you mean cut short? Who's cutting it short? How is it getting cut short? And the answer is that Jerusalem, some of Jerusalem was spared. Why? Because of Christians. But now wait a minute. If all of this is going to happen after the rapture, then where are the Christians going to be? They're going to be gone. So it's clear that Christians are still there, thus cutting short because of the grace of God upon His people, and some are being spared through the great tribulation, that is the destruction of Jerusalem, before He gets into verse 29 and the end of time and the second coming, eventually moving into verse 36 and what goes on there. So if you take away the Christian people in verse 40 and 41 through the rapture, then you can't go back and tie in the tribulation. You're trying to intertwine something that is not timing-wise or chronologically possible. And at the end of the day, verse 31 rather, through verse 46 of 25, chapter 25, that's where it's all at, right? The nations are going to come. God's going to judge the nations. So there's going to be a resurrection. John 5, verses 28 and 29. There's going to be a resurrection of the good, a resurrection of the evil. It's going to take place at the same time. All the nations are going to come. There's going to be a dividing of the nation, the goats and the sheep, and the righteous from the unrighteous. The righteous are going to go away into eternal bliss. The unrighteous are going to go away into eternal punishment. Make no mistake about it. It is eternal reward and eternal punishment, Matthew 25. Make no mistake about it. When the end of time comes, God's going to know who is ready and who is not ready. It'll all happen simultaneously. The message is, as verse 44 says, the message is, be ready, for you do not know the hour or the time when the Son of Man is coming. Be faithful to God. You know what? If you and I make it to heaven, and you see me in heaven, and there is actually a battle of Armageddon, and there is actually a rapture, I don't think you'll look at me and say, told you so. No, I think we'll all be rejoicing and celebrating and worshiping in the presence of God. I don't think in any way that Scripture justifies or even gives the opportunity for a battle of Armageddon as the world presents it in a physical battle of armies and tanks and fighters. I don't in any way believe that the Bible ever gives the opportunity for there to be some secret rapture where planes crash and cars crash because certain people are taken secretly because God is rescuing the righteous out and He's going to leave everybody else for a period of time. And I think you're taking out of the book of Revelation something that was meant to be figurative, and yet you're taking it very literal. Or a tribulation that is attributed to the end of time, the second coming, when in fact it should have been in reference to the great tribulation of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 that's already occurred, that would have meant something to those people. Why would Jesus in Matthew 24, why would John in Revelation 16 be telling people about something that's going to happen 2,000 plus years later? Why would that bring them any comfort or peace or reconciliation? So today, I think we need to be careful reading the first century document of the Bible and trying to apply it to our 21st century setting. We can become false teachers and false prophets and false doctrine based on that and trying to make all of the references pointing to something very literal. I'm not going to lie to you. There are some challenging parts of Matthew 24. And I have studied and read and read and read and read till my mind hurts. And I cannot with precision explain everything in Matthew 24. But what I can do is point you to the passages that we know and that we can decipher from and leave you to the further study for your own life. So with that being said, that's about our time for today. We'll come back and continue to look at, we still like 1 Timothy 4 and 2 Timothy 3, and we'll try to cover those next week. And then we'll even come back later and revisit some of these things that we've kind of introduced in our study this evening together. My prayer is that you be well, that you be safe, and that you continue to study the Word of God with an open heart and an open mind, seeking to gain understanding for your life as you live now, because we're all headed to the end of time, the second coming. And when it occurs, I believe it'll be like a thief, according to the Scriptures, that it'll be sudden, according to the Scriptures, and that it'll be in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, according to the Scriptures. And what'll matter then, Revelation 16 and verse 15, you be awake, you be dressed, you be prepared. Spiritually, not physically. You be prepared spiritually. Or in Matthew 24, that you be ready, verse 44, because you don't know the day or the hour, and neither do I. Hope you have a great weekend. We are meeting at 10 o'clock on Sunday mornings, 7 o'clock on Wednesday nights. If you're close by and would like to join us, love to have you. Bring your mask. Get ready to set social distance and not handshake or hug. We're trying to be as safe as we know how, but we'd love to have you. Take care.